Hello and welcome to the programme which looks at the Holy Land. I am Paul Calvert. Psalm 90 verse 1 from the New King James Bible says this: Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. I'm with Tristan Hall here at Christian Friends of Israel. Now, Tristan, you're from England, and we've just seen what happened at Glastonbury. Can you tell us what happened on the stage in Glastonbury?
Well, I don't want to repeat what was spoken, but it was more of this dreadful rhetoric. But he was also chanting death to the IDF, not only saying it himself, but rallying the crowd to say it with him, which was completely unacceptable. I mean, if there are laws against inciting racial hatred...
Now, saying free Palestine, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's your opinion and that's the way that you go, that's fine. But to actually say death to the IDF... and to hear the people in the crowd just chanting it back is quite shocking, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's incitement. I mean, no two ways about it. And what's most concerning is to witness, dare I say it, the two-tier justice system in action. I mean, this person should absolutely be charged, but we shall see if that happens.
Now, it's even more shocking when you think about what happened here in Israel. We had the Nova Music Festival where terrorists came in and so many people were murdered in the music festival in Israel, yet you have a music festival in England where they're saying death to the IDF, where in the Nova Festival they actually literally was death. That's quite shocking, isn't it?
It's a really good comparison that you've drawn out there. It is completely shocking. I mean, it should be shocking. If we get to a point where we're no longer shocked by this kind of rhetoric, then something's gone seriously wrong, because it means that we've all been desensitized. And that's exactly what happened in the 1930s in Europe, and particularly in Germany. People were desensitized to the racial hatred to the point where it became part of the fabric of society and then became something which was socially accepted. And we have to resist that happening again.
And we've also seen Palestine Action get onto an airbase. Tell us about what happened there.
Well, it's a complete embarrassment to the RAF that these people were able to infiltrate their base in the way that they did. And do you know what saddens me the most? Of course, I'm very pleased that Yvette Cooper has now said that this group is going to be classified under the Terrorist Act, because they absolutely fit the profile of an organisation that should be classified under that act. But what saddens me is that it's taken an infiltration into a RAF base for this legislation to be invoked. I understand that they caused a huge amount of damage, criminal damage, in the past. This isn't a new thing. They caused over £1 million worth of damage to a factory in Glasgow, and they've caused damage in other places as well. And the act was never invoked after those incidents. It's only now because it's happened on a military base. But anyway, at least it's happening now, and that's the important thing.
Now, everybody has the right to demonstrate, but we've got no right to be violent and we've got no right to chant death. Are you worried for the Jewish people of England today?
I think many of them are worried, and I see that there is a constant flow of aliyah from the UK, especially, of course, from London and Manchester. And in fact, some of our neighbours have made aliyah from these places and people that we're working with here. And I can well understand why they have made aliyah, because I mean, I never lived in London, but I understand that London is a completely different place now to what it was even 20 years ago, let alone 30, 40 years ago, and not for the better in many instances. It's supposedly a city that prides itself on multiculturalism, but what we're seeing is ghettoization, and for the Jewish people, many of them have been terrorized by some of the events that have been happening in the UK. And sadly, it's not just London, it's the same things happened in Paris, and well, look what happened in Washington, D.C. not long ago. And these things would have been unthinkable, maybe even 15, 20 years ago. So, yes, the world is changing rapidly, and I think many Jewish people are, even though it's not all a bed of roses in Israel, you know, there's challenges here, but the people are amazingly stoic, amazingly resilient, and the Israeli government and IDF have been quite extraordinary in how they've been handling the challenges. I mean, we've seen that over the last month. But many people in the diaspora are reconsidering their aliyah options, I think because of the changing profile at home in the nations and the increasing threats.
Do you see antisemitism as a spiritual battle?
Yes, absolutely. That's where it begins. It's been this spiritual force that's come against the Jewish people from time of old. You know, lots of people, October 2023, were referencing the scriptures about Amalek, and that Amalek has to be fought in every generation, and that sadly is the case in our own generation, and we're seeing Amalek pop up in all sorts of different guises in different countries, but the battle still has to be fought. And yes, it's first and foremost, it is a spiritual battle.
The Bible talks about sending out the fishers to bring people back to the land, and it talks about sending out the hunters. So today, do you see these people who are actually shouting Free Palestine and being aggressive and saying death to the IDF or attacking Air Force bases, do you see them as the hunters that the Bible was talking about, to maybe put a little bit of fear in the Jews for them to think, we're not safe here anymore, well, where are we safe? Let's go back to the land. And do you think God is using these events to bring the Jews back to the land?
I think what you're saying is exactly what's been happening. Of course, not all of the people that were protesting were violent. Some people just wanted to express their right to freedom of speech and their right to demonstrate. And of course, we're also big believers in freedom of speech. But the problem is that freedom is not being applied evenly. Some people are more free to speak than others. Some people are more free to protest than others. We've been witnessing that over the last 5 years. And this is unacceptable. It cannot be right that certain groups are allowed a platform to vent their views in quite often, quite what I would say, violent ways. It was many of those so-called protests actually descended into riots, and they were anything but peaceful protests, despite what we were told in the media. And they were, in the end, almost press gangs of people that were going about intimidating people and trying to put fear into Jewish communities. And I think they succeeded in doing that in many places. We were all aghast and agog in, the 8th of October, the 9th of October 2023, when no sooner, the blood still hadn't dried in the south of Israel, when people were marching on the streets in all the major capitals of the world and chanting the things that they chanted. I don't want to give any oxygen to it, but coming out in full force against Israel. It made no sense. It was a despicable display of hatred, and they ought never to have been allowed, but they were allowed, and as you said before, it's because we're fighting a spiritual war. It makes no sense that the Jews and Israel are constantly vilified and held to a higher standard than any other nation in the world, but it's because it's a spiritual war, and the Amalek is still trying to defeat them in every generation, but will not succeed.
We also see it as well with the posters of the hostages. People putting posters up and then people coming round and taking them down again. It's shocking, isn't it?
It was shocking, and it wasn't just so-called extremist Islamist groups that were doing that. It was quite often little old ladies or gents or well-educated Western people who just were taking up the cudgels for the pro-Palestine lobby in a way that was actually grotesque. Many of those posters were just saying, look, this person's held hostage, please pray for them, and they were tearing down the posters. It's very sad to witness that level of hatred and lack of humanity, but I think that's the result of years and years of calumny and misinformation and people really being completely deceived by spiritual lies.
If this is God bringing the Jews back to the land through a little bit of pain and suffering, what is CFI doing in the form of Aliyah, helping the Jews here in the land?
CFI's role from the beginning has always been to assist the Jewish people as they come back to Israel. So we're involved on the Israel side. So from about 1990, CFI opened a centre in Jerusalem to provide new immigrants with as much as they could. A lot of clothing, also housewares, things for the home, and other kinds of assistance, food vouchers. Actually, hundreds of thousands have been through that centre since that time. It was very strategic in the timing when it opened. It was just before, as the USSR was breaking up, and of course we all know what a tidal wave of Aliyah that resulted in, of Jewish people from the former USSR coming to Israel. I mean, such an Aliyah we've scarcely ever seen in history, and I mean, just tremendous. And it still hasn't finished. When I came back to Israel in April 2022, the queues of people at that centre, the CFI distribution centre in Jerusalem, queued out the door, Ukrainians coming for assistance. And of course, many of them were extremely poor. They weren't all necessarily wealthy people before they left, and even what little they had, they'd had to leave behind. Some had even come here without even maybe one suitcase, some with even nothing at all. So they were very grateful to receive any kind of practical assistance they could, particularly in a country where things are just so expensive. And then Russian Aliyah began to pick up again. As you mentioned about the hunters, well, hunting comes in all different guises, and many were actually They were people that could possibly have made Aliyah in years before, but they chose not to. But it was because times had got really hard in Russia, and some of them were being pressed for conscription into the Russian army, and they fled here to escape that. Some of them actually, husbands and wives, had to come alone through different countries and different routes to get here. We heard all sorts of stories, and that Aliyah is continuing. So we try to provide a bit of a welcoming committee on this side, and along with all the other ministries and that God has raised up to do that. We're not the only ones, but we're part of welcoming people on this side and helping them to establish themselves. We hope and pray, as it says in the scriptures, never to be uprooted again.
What is your prayer for Jews in the UK at the moment?
Of course, we pray for shalom in people's hearts and that they won't be afflicted with fear. But we also hope to see increasing aliyah from the UK, as we do from the USA as well. I mean, there's beautiful, beautiful Jewish communities in the UK and the USA, and it's not everybody's personal path to come back to Israel. Every person, every family has a different set of circumstances, so we recognise that. But how wonderful for every person, every family that does make Aliyah. And there's a thriving Anglosphere in the Jewish community in Israel, and there's surely room for more.
What's your website for people who'd like to know more about the work that you do in the area of Aliyah and perhaps even like to give to help some of the Jews come back to the land?
Yes, so we're on www.cfijerusalem.org, and we've got a vibrant Facebook page. That's where all the latest daily updates on the projects are put. So just do a Google search on CFI Jerusalem Facebook and you'll find it. And you're most welcome. We've got prayer Zooms that people can be part of. Obviously, there's room to donate. There's a way to fill in a form if people feel that they want to come and volunteer for short or long terms, and also ways to get involved with CFI in their own nations. And so all are welcome.
Well, Tristan, thank you very much for sharing today.
Thank you, Paul, always for your time.
Thank you for joining us today. Pray that God will move by his mighty power in the Holy Land and bring his peace.